Hey strangers, thanks for stopping by and spending your time with us. Before we start, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy it, don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Gate Opens. I had never seen anything like Elden. Even from the distance, as the highway twisted through the hills, the town seemed to float in its own strange, muted reality. No haze, no smog, no flicker of life beyond its perimeter. Just a perfect, geometric cluster of buildings, neatly aligned streets, and what looked like a park laid out with obsessive precision. The gates, tall and black, stood like sentinels, waiting for someone to notice them. I parked my car in the designated lot outside the town and stared at the main entrance. The air here was different, cleaner in a way I couldn't explain, yet it carried a subtle hum, almost like the town itself was breathing. My heart thrummed with a mixture of excitement and unease. Everyone had rumors about Elden, of course. Closed off for decades, opening only once a month for 24 hours, like some secret garden with a lock no one could pick. Curiosity had finally won. Walking toward the gates, I noticed the first peculiar detail: the residents. They weren't hiding, exactly, but their movements were too synchronized. A man sweeping the pavement paused exactly when another stepped out of a doorway, nodding briefly, as if rehearsed. A group of children ran past me, their laughter precise, almost measured. It made me uneasy in a way I couldn't articulate. The world outside seemed chaotic and unpredictable, but Elden radiated control. The gates swung open silently as I approached. A soft chime echoed through the street, and a small electronic panel flashed green, confirming my entry. No guards, no cameras in sight, just a door that decided, in its own silent judgment, that I was welcome. Inside, Elden was brighter than I expected. Sunlight fell evenly across every street, every facade, as though the town itself had been built to catch light at a perfect angle. Shops were meticulously arranged, their windows spotless. There was a faint scent in the air, something like polished wood and fresh paint, mixed with the earthiness of well-tended gardens. It was disorienting, beautiful, and a little surreal. And then I saw her. Not clearly, just a glimpse, a flash of dark hair across the corner of my eye, a shadow disappearing behind a lamppost. My heart skipped. I turned instinctively, but she was gone, leaving only the hum of the town and the faint rustle of leaves. I could not have told you if she was running or walking, male or female even, yet something about her presence lingered, unshakable. A spark of recognition, not of her, but of the feeling she carried into that space. Curiosity, caution, something like awareness. I wandered through the streets, my steps slow, taking everything in. Cafes sat neatly in rows, tables folded, chairs aligned. Parks were immaculate, paths winding with mathematical precision. Residents moved around me like part of a choreography, exchanging greetings, smiles measured, gestures deliberate. Occasionally my gaze flicked to where I thought I had seen her. Nothing. Just a town perfectly maintained, almost sterile. A bell rang somewhere down the street. I realized then that the gates had a schedule. They would close at sundown. Visitors like me had 24 hours to enter and 24 hours to leave. And somewhere in that day, I had caught the hint of something that would haunt me, a presence I couldn't define, a mystery I couldn't ignore. Elden was perfect, yes. Controlled, yes. But under that surface, It had already begun to change me. And I wanted more. Chapter 2: The Rules of Elden. The next morning, I woke before dawn in a small guest house that felt impossibly pristine, as if someone had vacuumed the air itself. The sheets were perfectly straight, the floor spotless, and the curtains aligned with mathematical precision. For a moment, I wondered if anyone had actually slept here before. Then I remembered, Elden doesn't cater to the ordinary. It caters to the curious, the ones who arrive uninvited, unprepared, and leave changed. Breakfast was served in silence. I followed a narrow corridor to a dining room filled with neatly set tables. I had expected to meet someone, a host, a guide, but the trays were empty. A woman in a uniform glided past silently, her expression neutral, hands folded in front of her. She did not speak, did not acknowledge me. I sat down and took a small plate of fruit that seemed to appear out of nowhere. No one else was present, but the sense of observation was palpable. I decided it was time to learn the rules. Somewhere in my research before arriving, I had heard whispers about restrictions, warnings, regulations. Now, wandering into the town square again, I found a small kiosk labeled Visitor Instructions. A printed notice, elegantly simple, detailed the rules of Elden. 1. No photography. 2. No questions about the town or its residents. 3. No contact with residents after sundown. 4. Leave the town when the gates close. 5. Observe, enjoy, but do not interfere. It was a checklist that felt less like guidance and more like a set of absolutes, each line a reminder of the invisible order controlling this place. I tucked the note into my pocket, reading and rereading it. Every rule emphasized detachment, the distance between visitors and residents, and yet I could already feel that distance fraying in the corners of my mind. As I wandered through the streets, I observed the residents more carefully. There was a rhythm to their movement, a choreography I could not understand, but that clearly existed. A man carried a basket of flowers down the sidewalk. A woman with a wide-brimmed hat appeared from behind a corner, nodded politely, then disappeared again. Even the children seemed aware of their timing, of the invisible metronome keeping their laughter in check. And then, there she was. Not close this time. She stood at the far end of the street, just outside a cafe that smelled faintly of fresh bread and roasted coffee. She leaned against a post, her posture casual yet impossibly composed. I froze, caught between wanting to walk toward her and fearing any action might break some invisible law. She didn't notice me, or perhaps she did and chose not to react. Either way, the sight of her made my chest tighten. I forced myself to look away, pretending to examine the windows of a shop across the street. But my mind betrayed me. I kept sneaking glances, noting the tilt of her head, the way sunlight caught her hair. Even in stillness, she seemed to exist in a different plane, tethered to the town, but somehow separate from it. I couldn't shake the sense that she had always been there, waiting for someone like me to notice. Later, I explored the residential streets. Each house was immaculate, gardens trimmed to perfection, fences aligned with geometric precision. Some windows were open, revealing glimpses of interiors, chairs arranged just so, tables set for meals, lamps casting soft glows. The residents passed by, sometimes catching my eye with polite acknowledgement, sometimes not noticing me at all. But every time my attention returned to her. She moved through the streets like a shadow, appearing briefly, disappearing before I could approach her. Sometimes she lingered near other residents, laughing quietly or exchanging a few words, though always distant from me. It was frustrating and exhilarating, the tease of presence without access, a mystery I could not solve. I felt myself growing obsessed with the moments she appeared, replaying them in my mind with obsessive detail. By mid-afternoon, I realized the pattern of the town. The residents were bound by rules I could not see, yet I felt their presence like a force field around me. The sun began its slow descent, the shadows stretching over the cobblestones, and as if on cue, the first drones appeared. Sleek, metallic, humming softly, they patrolled the streets, scanning the sidewalks. I moved instinctively out of their path, though there was no direct threat, only observation, control. She appeared one last time before sundown. Standing under a street lamp that had not yet been turned on, she watched the drones with a neutral expression. When her gaze met mine, fleeting and brief, I felt a connection that had nothing to do with words. It was curiosity, recognition, a silent acknowledgement of our shared trespass into her ordered world. Then she was gone, melting into the alleyways before I could even take a step toward her. The gates began their slow, silent closing. I could hear the subtle hum of mechanisms, the faint click of heavy metal sliding into place. Visitors who had arrived with me were escorted quietly by the drones, following the invisible paths laid out for them. I lingered near the edge, torn between leaving and lingering, knowing that every second counted. The town with its perfect lines and measured air was alive with secrets I could not yet comprehend. And in that moment, I realized something. Elden was not just a town, it was a living experiment, a controlled environment where every glance, every gesture, every fleeting interaction was monitored. And somewhere within its boundaries, the girl existed, a constant, unspoken thread pulling me forward, daring me to break the rules without ever saying a word. I left the town with the sense that nothing had truly been revealed. The gates closed behind me, cutting off the hum of Elden like a heartbeat stilled. And yet her presence lingered, a shadow that refused to fade. I had seen her twice, not enough to know, not enough to touch, but enough to want. The month ahead would be long. Every day outside Elden would be filled with the memory of her brief appearances, the puzzle of her existence in a town that should have been untouchable. I would return. I didn't know when, or how, or even why I was compelled, but I knew I would. And when I did, I would find her. Chapter 3. The Encounter. Subtle Introduction. The town felt smaller the second time I entered. Perhaps it was familiarity, or perhaps my mind had sharpened to the rhythm of Elden. Every corner, every lamp post, every carefully pruned tree seemed less like a random creation and more like a carefully placed piece in an intricate puzzle. And yet, despite my growing awareness of the town's perfection, I felt the same thrill as the first day, a thrill that always returned when I sensed her presence nearby. I wandered through the streets, letting curiosity guide me. The morning sun was soft, diffused by thin clouds that made every shadow seem deliberate, as though Elden itself were testing my perception. I passed the bakery again, its windows fogged slightly from ovens I could not see. There were residents moving through the streets in their practiced harmony, nodding politely, their faces calm and measured. Everything was as controlled and serene as before, except for the occasional flicker at the edge of my vision. And then she appeared. I was rounding a corner near a small square lined with flowering shrubs when she stepped into view. This time not just a shadow or a glimpse, but fully, though still distant, still elusive. She moved gracefully, her steps silent against the cobblestones, and for a brief moment our eyes met. The world seemed to shrink, everything else blurred. It was a glance that lasted less than a heartbeat, yet I felt an inexplicable pull toward her. I wanted to approach, to speak, to ask her name, but something held me back. There was an unspoken rule here, a tension that ran under every smile and every measured gesture. I decided instead to follow her at a distance, careful to remain unnoticed. She moved with purpose, yet not hurriedly, as though she knew the town and I did not. She paused near a fountain in the center of the square. I watched from behind a low hedge, noting the way sunlight caught her hair, the subtle tilt of her head as she observed a pair of children playing nearby. Her attention was gentle, patient, but her eyes held something more, a faint wariness, as though she knew I was there but was deciding whether to acknowledge me. Then it happened. A loose page fluttered from a book she carried, drifting toward the fountain. Without thinking, I stepped forward and caught it before it touched the ground. Our eyes met again. This time she smiled, a quick, fleeting expression, almost shy, almost apologetic. She did not speak, but the smile was enough to create a connection I could not ignore. "I think this is yours," I said softly, holding the page out to her. Her gaze lingered on the paper, then on me. She tilted her head slightly, a curious gesture that made my chest tighten. "Thank you," she murmured, voice light, almost musical, yet careful not to reveal too much. She reached out, took the page, and for a moment our hands brushed. The touch was brief, but electric, a spark in the ordered calm of Elden. I nodded, unsure what to say next. Words felt inadequate, clumsy, as if any attempt to speak would shatter the fragile thread that connected us in that fleeting moment. She gave a small nod in return, and then, as quietly as she had appeared, she was gone, around the corner, into an alley, leaving me standing there, heart hammering, mind spinning. For the rest of the day, I found myself retracing the streets, trying to catch another glimpse, hoping for some sign, some repetition of that brief connection. But Elden was relentless in its order. She had disappeared into its rhythm, blending seamlessly into the choreography of residents and shadows. Yet I could not stop thinking about her. Every subtle movement I had noticed, the way she adjusted her hair, the tilt of her head, the slight hesitation before she accepted the page, played over and over in my mind. I realized that this fascination was no longer casual curiosity. It was something deeper, something that demanded attention, demanded action. I wandered to the edge of the square, leaning against the fountain where she had paused. The water trickled quietly, a soft, steady sound that contrasted with the chaos of my racing thoughts. I tried to analyze the day, the town, and her place within it, but nothing fit neatly. Elden was perfect, yes, but it was a perfection that seemed designed to obscure, to distract, to keep people, visitors like me, from understanding the whole truth. Yet she had appeared, briefly piercing the carefully constructed veil. That small encounter, less than a minute, perhaps only a heartbeat, had shifted everything. I had seen her in fragments before, shadows in the periphery, fleeting glimpses that teased my attention. Now I had shared a moment, however brief, however incomplete. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, I realized that the gates would soon close. Drones hummed softly in the distance, patrolling the streets and reminding visitors of the invisible boundaries that governed their stay. I lingered a moment longer, hoping, almost desperately, for one last glimpse of her. But Elden's order was absolute. She did not appear again. Leaving the town, I felt an unfamiliar ache, a longing that went beyond curiosity. It was not just the town I was drawn to anymore, it was her, the girl who had existed in the margins of my vision, who had become real for a heartbeat, and who had vanished before I could truly grasp her presence. That night, in the quiet of my temporary lodging outside Elden, I replayed the encounter endlessly. Every gesture, every glance, every fleeting touch was magnified, etched into my memory. I realized with a jolt that I would return, not just to explore Elden, but to find her again, to understand the fragment of reality she had shared with me, to see if our paths could cross once more, intentionally, rather than by fleeting chance. I fell asleep with the memory of her smile, the brush of her hand, the way she had looked at me, an impossible connection in a town that should have been impossible. And when I dreamed that night, the dream was of Elden, empty and quiet, yet with her presence lingering just out of reach, a promise I could not yet fulfill. Chapter 4. The First Goodbye. The sun hung low over Elden, casting long shadows across streets that had felt so alive earlier in the day. Now everything seemed quieter, slower, as if the town itself was holding its breath, preparing for the closing hour. I wandered through the main square one last time, reluctant to leave, hoping for even a fragment of another encounter with her. She appeared, as if the town had sensed my longing. Standing near the fountain where we had first crossed paths, she was composed, calm, yet there was a subtle tension in her shoulders, an unspoken awareness of the approaching hour. My chest tightened. I wanted to speak, to ask her everything, but the rules of Elden, or the invisible rules it had instilled in its residents, pressed down on me. I could not. Instead, I walked slowly, letting my steps bring me closer without seeming deliberate. She noticed me, of course, she always did. Her eyes met mine briefly, the faintest acknowledgement of recognition, and then she turned away, pretending to tend to something on the fountain's edge. A single leaf floated in the water. She adjusted it, careful not to disturb the stillness around her. I stayed a few steps behind, caught in the strange dance Elden had created. There were no words exchanged. The town had no need for words to control the flow of interaction. Yet in the silence I felt everything. Her awareness of me, my obsession with her, the fragile connection threading between us. As the sun dipped further, I heard the soft mechanical hum of drones beginning their patrols. Sleek, metallic, their presence was both a warning and a promise. Elden closes its gates at sundown, and those who remain are escorted out, whether they wish it or not. My heart raced. I had not planned for this. The rules were clear, the boundaries rigid, yet my desire to see her again overrode any thought of caution. She glanced toward the sky, as if sensing the drone's approach. Then, for a moment, our eyes locked. There was something in her gaze, not fear, not overt acknowledgement, but a quiet intensity that made my pulse quicken. It was a look that said, "I see you. I know you are here. But there are limits." I stepped closer, careful not to startle her. I don't know your name," I said softly, my voice barely carrying over the gentle trickle of the fountain. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, her expression unreadable. And then a single word: soon. It was enough to make my chest ache. Soon. Not now, not yet, but a promise that the thread connecting us had not been broken. I nodded, unsure if she could see it, and took a hesitant step back. The hum of the drones grew louder, closer. Other visitors had begun to gather near the gates, waiting their turn to be escorted out. I realized with a pang that my time was running out. I wanted to linger, to ask her more, to understand even a fragment of the life she led in this meticulously controlled town. But the rules were absolute. She moved then, stepping lightly toward a side street I had not noticed before. Without looking back, she disappeared into the shadowed path, leaving me staring after her, breath shallow, heart heavy. The gates would close soon, and she would vanish from my world until the next opening. I followed the crowd reluctantly, my steps guided by the silent order of Elden. Drones hovered above, scanning, herding, ensuring compliance. I kept catching glimpses of her in the distance, always moving, always just out of reach. Each time I saw her, the ache in my chest deepened. It was a longing that went beyond fascination, beyond curiosity. It was something raw, emotional, unavoidable. Outside the gates, the normal world waited. The hum of engines, the irregularity of life, the chaotic unpredictability of reality. It was all jarring after the precise control of Elden. I turned back once, hoping for one last glimpse, one last connection. The town looked serene, almost oblivious to my intrusion. And there she was, a fleeting shadow against the fountain's glow, watching, aware, gone before I could hope for more. The car ride back was silent. My mind replayed every gesture, every glance, every fleeting interaction. Her presence had already begun to haunt me. I realized with an almost frightening clarity that I was no longer visiting Elden out of mere curiosity. I was visiting her. The town itself was only a backdrop for the enigma that had captured my attention and refused to let go. Obsession had begun, quiet and relentless. I thought about the coming month, the empty days, the hours spent in mundane reality where her absence felt like a physical weight. And yet, within that obsession, there was hope, the promise embedded in that single word, soon, a thread I could follow, a reason to return. Elden had closed its gates, its mechanical hum fading into the distance, but the town had already left its mark. It had shifted something in me, something deep, primal, a need to understand, to seek, to find the fragment of life that had appeared for mere moments and disappeared. I knew one thing with certainty: I would return. Not to explore, not to observe, not to satisfy idle curiosity. I would return for her, the girl who existed in glimpses and shadows, who had already begun to unravel the rhythm of my thoughts and emotions. And when I did, I would not let the rules, the drones, or the meticulous perfection of Elden keep us apart. I didn't know how, I didn't know if it was possible, but I knew I would try. Because even a fleeting connection in a town like Elden could become everything. Chapter 5: The Waiting Month. Outside Elden, the world felt unbearably ordinary. The sky was the same gray I had seen countless times, cars honked in uneven rhythms, and people moved without regard for anything but their own distractions. Nothing resembled the quiet perfection of Elden, and yet every corner, every street light, every fragment of normal life seemed infused with the memory of what I had left behind. The first few days were the hardest. I walked through my city mechanically, retracing paths I had always known, noticing for the first time how chaotic, messy, and unrefined everything felt. The hum of daily life was harsh compared to the smooth, almost musical rhythm of Elden. Even the sunlight here seemed less bright, less deliberate. And then there was her. Not in reality, of course, not physically, not in reach, but in my mind. Her presence haunted me. Every small detail came back. The brush of her hand against the page I returned to her. The tilt of her head when she said soon. The way she moved through the streets as though she were part of the town but entirely separate from it. I could recall her hair, the way light caught it, the sound of her voice, the soft, restrained cadence that made my heart tighten. I realized I was obsessed. Perhaps that was too mild a word. She had claimed a part of my attention and would not relinquish it, not for days, not for weeks. I spent hours replaying each fleeting moment, analyzing every gesture, every look, every movement, as if by doing so, I could reconstruct her reality from fragments. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down everything I remembered about her, appearances, expressions, patterns in her movements. I noted the locations she lingered, the times she appeared, even small details like how she touched the fountain's edge or paused near a lamppost. I drew crude maps of Elden from memory, marking streets, shops, alleyways, and squares. Each time I imagined her in the town, the edges of reality blurred, and Elden became less a place and more a construct of my obsession. Friends and colleagues noticed my absence, my distraction. I couldn't explain it. I tried once or twice to talk about Elden, to recount the streets, the people, the perfection. But their eyes glazed over. Elden was too unreal for them, too improbable, too secret. And I couldn't tell them about her, Not her name, not the fleeting moments, not the pull that had already taken hold of me. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? The weeks crawled. I counted them meticulously. 24 days of ordinary life, then the day of the town's reopening. Every night I dreamed of her, not always in the same way. Sometimes she was distant, watching me from a shadowed alleyway. Sometimes she was close, just out of reach, her presence tangible but intangible. Every dream left me with the same ache, the same burning curiosity, the same certainty that I would return. I began to notice other things about myself. The world outside Elden seemed dull and uncoordinated, chaotic and messy. My thoughts became sharper, more focused, as if the precision of Elden had lodged inside me, reshaping the way I perceived time, space, and movement. I rehearsed my steps, imagining walking the streets, anticipating drone patrols, memorizing the timing of gates and closures. Every detail mattered. Every moment I had glimpsed her demanded attention. I thought about the drones, those silent sentinels that ensured order, and I considered what it would mean to defy them, to follow her, to approach her, to break whatever invisible rules bound us. The thought thrilled me and terrified me at once. There was danger, certainly, but also possibility. The possibility that the next visit would allow me more than just fleeting glances. And yet, I knew patience was essential. She had appeared only briefly, twice, and both times had retreated before I could truly connect. Elden had its rhythm, its invisible order, and my first attempts at understanding had shown me that it did not easily yield its secrets. To force interaction would be reckless. I had to wait, observe, prepare. In those long, empty days, I began imagining her life. Not in full, not in concrete terms, but in fragments. Perhaps she woke early, walked through streets I could only imagine, interacting with residents who maintained the town's perfection. Perhaps she wondered about me, the visitor who had appeared uninvited, intruding into her world and vanishing before she could respond. The thought was tantalizing and maddening. I counted the days, each one a slow drip of anticipation. Every evening, I reviewed my notebook, tracing lines of streets, recalling details I had barely noticed the first time. Every moment became a rehearsal, a meditation, a preparation for the day I would return. My thoughts were consumed, but in that consumption, I found a strange clarity. I knew my purpose. I knew why I would return. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a whisper persisted. She was waiting. Perhaps not for me, perhaps unaware, perhaps following the town's own schedule. But I sensed her presence in the memory of Elden itself, in the empty streets, in the ordered squares and silent fountains. She was there, always just out of reach, a puzzle I could not ignore, a mystery I was compelled to follow. By the time the day of the next opening approached, my anticipation had reached a fever pitch. I packed lightly, making no note of supplies beyond the essentials. Nothing mattered except returning to Elden, returning to her. The town had already changed me, its perfection, its rhythm, its quiet, unyielding control, but it had also given me a thread to follow, a reason to endure the emptiness of the waiting month. And as I drove toward the town again, heart hammering in my chest, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. I would not leave this time without seeing her, without understanding, without closing even a fraction of the distance between us. Elden awaited, and so did she. Chapter 6. The Second Visit. The road to Elden felt longer this time, though I had traveled it before. Perhaps it was my own anticipation, the weight of a month spent replaying memories, rehearsing steps, imagining encounters that might never come. The sun was just rising when I arrived, spilling pale light over the hills and the dark outline of Elden's gates. They loomed silently, indifferent to my presence, waiting as they always did for the next visitor to appear. Passing through the gates felt different this time. Familiarity clashed with expectation. I knew the streets, the squares, the fountain where we had first touched the edges of connection, and yet something had changed. The town seemed slightly off. Not chaotic, never chaotic, but subtly rearranged. A side street I remembered was gone, replaced by a narrow path lined with shrubs I didn't recognize. The cafe where I had glimpsed her before now had a new window display, the arrangement of chairs slightly altered, the colors shifted. Residents moved with the same careful rhythm, but I noticed small differences in their behavior. Gestures that had seemed mechanical before now hinted at unease, a faint tremor in the perfection. Perhaps it was my mind projecting, my obsession coloring the town with suspicion. Or perhaps Elden itself was not as immutable as it appeared. I caught a glimpse of her early, near the fountain. She was alone this time, watching the water ripple over the stone edges. My chest tightened at the sight, familiar yet strange, comforting yet disorienting. I approached slowly, careful not to startle her. Her head tilted slightly, as if sensing me without looking directly at me. But something was different. There was a hesitation in her movements, a subtle tension I had not noticed before. She seemed incomplete, as though part of her memory of me had been erased, leaving only fragments. I stopped a few steps away, pretending to observe the fountain. She glanced at me briefly, then turned her attention back to the water. I wanted to speak, to bridge the gap, but the rhythm of Elden, the invisible rules I had begun to internalize, held me back. Instead, I watched, letting the moment stretch, memorizing every detail. The way she brushed her hair behind her ear, the angle of her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers as they touched the edge of the fountain. We did not speak. Words felt unnecessary, even dangerous. Yet in the silence, I felt the connection deepen. She was here, in this moment, with me, but not fully accessible. The sense of mystery was intoxicating, her presence more compelling than anything I had experienced in the outside world. I wandered the streets, careful to remain within her view without appearing intrusive. Every corner seemed to hold a memory of our first encounter, yet each one was altered, rearranged. The bakery had shifted, the benches in the park slightly moved, even the way sunlight hit the cobblestones seemed different, casting new patterns of shadow and light. Elden was changing, and I had the uncomfortable realization that its perfection was a living, mutable thing, not fixed, not permanent. She appeared intermittently throughout the day, sometimes near the fountain, sometimes walking along streets I had memorized. Each time she seemed slightly different, as though fragments of memory were missing. Sometimes she paused as if recalling something forgotten. Other times she moved with mechanical precision, unaware of the subtle beauty around her. I began to suspect that she was not entirely herself, that Elden had altered her, trimmed pieces of her existence like a gardener shaping a tree. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, my fascination grew. Each fleeting glimpse, each fragment of recognition, fueled an obsession I could no longer deny. I was no longer a visitor merely observing a town. I was a participant in an unspoken game, drawn toward her as the rules of Elden threatened to keep us apart. I attempted small gestures of acknowledgement, subtle and safe. A nod when our paths crossed, a quiet smile, a deliberate pause near her line of sight. Each time her response was nuanced, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. Awareness, recognition, cautious engagement. It was a dialogue without words, a conversation built entirely of presence and attention. By mid-afternoon, I had explored more of the town than I had the first visit. Some streets were new, some shops rearranged, some houses replaced entirely. The town was alive, but not in a natural way, in a controlled, deliberate way, like a carefully staged set. And in that set, she existed as both a participant and a mystery, the focal point of my obsession and the key to understanding Elden itself. I found her again near the fountain as the day began its slow descent. She was kneeling slightly, adjusting a fallen leaf, her movements precise, yet tinged with a strange hesitation. I stepped closer, careful not to disturb the rhythm of her actions. This time our eyes met fully. There was recognition, a flicker of memory, but also a shadow of uncertainty, as if she could not recall everything she should. "Do you remember?" I asked softly, my voice carrying more reason than hope. Her gaze lingered on me, then drifted to the fountain. She shook her head faintly, almost imperceptibly. "Fragments," she murmured. The word sent a shiver through me. Pieces of her memory, her awareness, had been altered, and yet she still responded, still engaged, still existed as the connection that had drawn me back to Elden. The knowledge that part of her was missing only deepened my obsession. I wanted to know her fully, to reclaim what Elden had hidden from her, to restore the wholeness that had been erased. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching across the streets. Drones appeared quietly in the distance, their hum a reminder that time in Elden was finite, controlled. I lingered for a few more moments, committing every detail to memory: her hesitation, the tilt of her head, the faint tremor in her fingers, and then, as if sensing the approaching limit, she moved away, slipping into an alley I had not noticed before. I followed at a distance, heart racing, mind whirling. The town was a maze, constantly shifting, constantly testing my awareness. Each step brought both hope and frustration, and every glimpse of her reinforced the obsession I had tried to contain during the long waiting month. I left Elden that day with the same ache I had felt before, but now it was tempered with a deeper understanding. The town had changed, she had changed, and I had begun to realize that the rules of observation, of interaction, were only the surface of a far more intricate design, one I was determined to navigate, to explore, and ultimately to defy. Chapter 7: Hidden Truths. I had expected familiarity when I returned to Elden, but instead I found uncertainty. The town's perfection, once comforting in its predictability, now felt like a carefully constructed trap. Streets I had memorized were subtly altered, alleyways shifted, shop displays replaced. Even the fountain where I had first encountered her looked slightly different. The stone edges sharper, the water's flow more precise. I walked slowly, noting every detail, searching for the anomalies I sensed but could not yet name. Something was watching. I could feel it in the air, in the way residents moved around me, in the faint hum that wasn't just the drones. It was a presence I could not define, like the edge of a shadow brushing against the corner of perception. And then I noticed the first tangible evidence. A small panel, metallic and embedded in the side of a building, blinked faintly when I passed. At first I thought it was a reflection, a trick of the sunlight, but the more I observed, the more I realized it was deliberate. A hidden sensor, a discrete camera, part of a network that monitored the town's activity. I crouched, examining it carefully, noting wires that ran into the walls, subtle markings that suggested constant observation. The realization hit me like a punch. Elden was not just a town, it was a controlled environment, a laboratory where every action, every glance, every fleeting interaction was recorded, analyzed, cataloged. The residents were part of the experiment. The visitors were part of the experiment, and I, drawn back month after month, was both participant and subject. My heart pounded, and yet I could not leave. Not now. Not when she existed in the margins, when fragments of her awareness had begun to form a connection with me. I moved cautiously, following the paths I had memorized, my eyes scanning for more anomalies. There were more. Tiny cameras hidden in streetlights, sensors embedded in benches, and small metallic discs near windowsills that had no apparent function except to observe. The town's perfection was a facade, a controlled surface that concealed a complex web of surveillance. And the longer I looked, the more I realized how carefully Elden manipulated memory, perception, and interaction. I thought of her, the girl whose presence had drawn me back again and again, the one who had seemed to recognize me, yet who now acted as though fragments of our encounters were missing. It was clear, Elden was not just observing me, it was shaping her, altering what she remembered, controlling the fragments of interaction that formed between us. I watched her from a distance, noting the hesitations, the pauses, and the subtle confusion in her movements. Each flicker of uncertainty was a sign, a clue that pieces of her awareness were being erased, replaced, or guided. I wanted to call out to her, to warn her, but I knew better. Any direct action might alert the system, draw attention, ruin the fragile connection we had built in moments and fragments. Instead, I followed quietly, committing every detail to memory. She paused at the fountain again, brushing a leaf aside, her eyes distant. I noticed a faint indentation in the stone, a metallic sensor hidden under the water's edge. My stomach tightened. Everything here was observed, and yet she moved through it, partially aware, partially controlled, a perfect subject of a controlled experiment I had only begun to understand. I tried to speak with other residents, to glean hints of the truth, but they were cautious, careful. Their smiles were polite, but rehearsed, their nods too precise. There was no malice, no hostility, only a subtle evasion, as if even acknowledging the questions could break the illusion. One older man, tending a small garden, allowed a flicker of recognition to pass in his eyes before tightening his posture, guiding me away with a courteous but firm hand. The day wore on, each moment layered with the tension of awareness. I realized that Elden was mutable. Streets shifted, facades changed, and residents' behaviors adapted, depending on who observed them. It was a dynamic experiment, constantly adjusting, calibrating, and shaping experience. And at the center of this orchestration, whether by design or coincidence, was her. I found her near an alley I had never noticed before. She paused, glanced around, and for a brief instant our eyes met. Recognition, hesitation, fragmented memory all danced across her features. My pulse raced. I wanted to reach her, to explain, to connect, but I had to resist. Any interaction could be monitored, manipulated, and erased. Instead, I lingered in the shadows, watching. Every step she took was a reminder that she was both real and controlled, a being caught between autonomy and observation. And every moment reminded me that my obsession was no longer casual. I needed to understand, to uncover, and to protect what fragments of her awareness remained untouched. By late afternoon, I had pieced together a tentative understanding. Elden's perfection was a facade. Its streets, residents, and even its light were carefully orchestrated. Surveillance was everywhere, hidden in plain sight. And she, the girl who had captured my attention, whose memory was being shaped and pruned, was not just a resident, also a subject. The truth terrified me, yet it also clarified my purpose. I could not leave her to the control of the town. I could not abandon the fragments of connection we had formed. The more I understood, the more determined I became. Whatever Elden was, whatever it wanted, I would find a way to reach her, to pierce through the orchestration, and to reclaim the moments we had been allowed. As the sun dipped lower, drones began their quiet patrol, reminding all visitors that the day's observation would end soon. I lingered near the fountain one last time, memorizing the sensors, noting her movements, and committing to memory the faint tremor of uncertainty in her hands. She glanced toward the sky, sensing the patrol, and slipped into a narrow alleyway, disappearing from view. I left Elden with the same ache I had felt before, but now it was sharpened by understanding. The town was not just a mystery, it was a cage, and she, the girl I could barely reach, was both its prisoner and its focus. I would return. I would learn more. I would find a way to break the rules. And when I did, she would not be lost to fragments any longer. Chapter 8. The Plan. The days between visits had never felt so long. Each morning I woke with a single thought, unrelenting and clear. I had to return to Elden. I could not stop thinking about her, about the fragments of awareness she retained, the glimpses of recognition, and the subtle hesitations that told me Elden had begun to shape her mind. The thought of her being controlled, of her life being orchestrated by invisible hands, ignited a desperate resolve in me. I started small, observing, analyzing. I had memorized the streets, the gates, the locations of hidden sensors. Every drone patrol, every subtle shift in residents' movements, every change in the town's layout was cataloged in my mind and in the notebook I carried obsessively. I began to imagine paths we could take, routes that might allow us to move unnoticed, gaps in the surveillance that could be exploited. And then, the question that haunted me most: would she even want to leave? Her hesitation, her fragmented memory, suggested a life so embedded in Elden that leaving might be terrifying. I could not force her. I could not act alone. The plan would require her trust, a fragile thread I had to nurture carefully without exposing her to danger. When I returned to Elden, the town was subtly different again. Streets I had memorized last month had shifted. Alleyways were narrower, shop windows rearranged. The fountain where we had shared fleeting moments was pristine, but the sensors I had observed before were now more numerous, discreetly placed to monitor every angle. I found her near the fountain again. She was adjusting a fallen leaf, precise, deliberate, yet with a faint uncertainty in her posture. When our eyes met, recognition flickered, and I felt the fragile thread between us tighten. I could almost reach her, almost communicate the thought forming in my mind. We could leave, together. But I could not speak it aloud. Any audible words might be intercepted, recorded, manipulated. Instead, I let my presence communicate what I could not say. A nod, a careful pause near her line of sight, a silent acknowledgement of awareness. She responded in kind, a subtle tilt of her head, the briefest trace of curiosity and trust. Over the course of the day, I began testing boundaries. I moved closer to hidden sensors, noting gaps in coverage, timing my movements with the drone patrols. I memorized routes that could be taken under the radar, paths that avoided detection. Each discovery, each observation brought a small surge of hope, proof that escape might be possible, that the town's perfection was not absolute. She appeared intermittently throughout the day, always near the fountain or along familiar streets. I began leaving subtle signals, gestures she could notice without revealing my intent to others. A slight shift in my position, a hand placed briefly on the edge of the fountain, a movement that suggested attention without intrusion. Each signal was a test, a question. Do you notice me? Do you trust me enough to follow? Her responses were careful, measured, but unmistakable. A glance held slightly longer than usual, a tilt of her head toward my movements, the faintest hesitation when she adjusted her path. I realized that despite Elden's manipulation, she was noticing, responding, engaging in the silent dialogue I had initiated. The thread of trust was forming, fragile but real. As the sun began its descent, I retreated to a shadowed alley, reviewing the paths I had memorized, rehearsing the sequence of movements that might allow us to leave undetected. I imagined her alongside me, moving silently, carefully, through the town's shifting streets, past the drones, past the sensors, into the forest beyond Elden. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying, hope and fear intertwined. The plan was forming, precise yet flexible, fragile yet necessary. I knew the next visit would be decisive. Every observation, every rehearsal, every careful gesture would culminate in a single opportunity. An opportunity to reach her, to guide her, to escape. And if I failed, I could only hope that the thread of trust we had begun to weave would endure until the next opening, until another chance, until we could try again. Because I could not leave her behind. Chapter 9. The Escape. The day had arrived. My mind was taut with anticipation, rehearsed movements running through my head like a pre-recorded sequence. Every detail mattered. The timing of drone patrols, the locations of hidden sensors, the shifts in streets I had memorized. And most importantly, her. She would need to follow, trust, and move with me, step by careful step. I found her near the fountain, as always, adjusting a fallen leaf. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw a flicker of recognition, and perhaps understanding. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. She hesitated for a heartbeat, and then nodded. The wordless agreement hung between us like a promise. I moved first, glancing over my shoulder to ensure the path was clear. Shadows shifted with the afternoon sun, and drones hummed in distant patrol patterns. I had memorized the gaps, calculated their timing to the minute. She followed silently, her steps cautious but confident, moving in the rhythm we had practiced in memory and imagination. The town, for all its precision, seemed almost alive in its resistance. Streets curved differently than I recalled, alleyways opened or closed unpredictably, and sensors blinked faintly in hidden corners. Each movement required vigilance. Each turn demanded split-second calculation. But we advanced steadily, invisibility maintained by patience and rehearsal. A drone hummed closer than expected. I froze, pressing her gently into the shadow of a building. Her breath was light against my shoulder, hesitant but steady. The drone passed, scanning the street with mechanical precision, and then moved on. We waited, counting heartbeats, before resuming our escape. The alleys led us away from the central square, twisting unpredictably, yet I had memorized each step. I ducked behind shop facades, skirted along walls, and avoided the faint glint of sensors hidden in plain sight. Her hand brushed against mine briefly as we turned a corner, and I felt the thread of trust tighten, tangible, real, fragile, but unbroken. We reached a narrow side street I had discovered on previous visits, one with minimal surveillance. I motioned for her to follow closely, careful not to draw attention. She hesitated, glancing back at the familiar streets, the fountain, the town's rhythm. I understood her hesitation. Elden had been her world, her reality. To step beyond it was to risk everything she had known, yet she stepped forward, trusting the silent promise we had forged. The forest beyond Elden's boundary was near. I had memorized the path, the slight incline leading to the tree line where the drone's reach diminished. We moved quickly, yet cautiously, synchronizing our steps with the calculated timing of patrols. Every heartbeat felt amplified, every breath a whisper in the tension-filled air. And then the unexpected. A new drone, one I had not anticipated, appeared ahead, its sensors sweeping in a precise arc. I froze, dragging her behind a low wall, feeling the surge of fear that came with discovery. She trembled slightly, and I pressed a reassuring hand against hers. "We can do this," I whispered, though the words were for both of us. We waited, counting the drone's rotations, anticipating the blind spot I had mapped in memory. When the suite passed, we sprinted across the open stretch, moving in the brief moment of safety. My chest burned, my legs ached, but I could not stop. She was there, beside me, a pulse of warmth and life, and the thought of losing her before reaching the forest was unbearable. We reached the edge of the trees, the last barrier before freedom. I glanced back. The town sprawled behind us, perfectly controlled, impossibly precise. The drone patrols adjusted, the hum growing closer. My mind raced. One final stretch, one final push, and then a bright beam of light swept across the path, catching both of us in its glare. Time slowed. I saw her face, eyes wide with fear, recognition, and trust all at once. I reached for her hand, but it was already too late. Mechanical arms, the enforcement units I had only glimpsed from the corners of the town, emerged from the shadows, surrounding us, corralling us like prey. The forest, the path to freedom, was just meters away. I felt her fingers slip from mine, the thread of connection breaking under the force of control. The units moved with efficiency, her weight pulled from my side, and I struggled, heart hammering, desperate to reach her. But Elden's system was absolute, unyielding, precise. One of the units gripped me firmly, lifting me off the ground. I caught one last glimpse of her face, eyes locked on mine, fear and desperation mirrored in her gaze. And then she was gone, pulled backward into the town's perfectly orchestrated labyrinth, while I was carried in the opposite direction, away from everything I had fought for, everything I had memorized, everything I had loved. The forest remained just out of reach. The trees, the path, freedom itself, all vanished in an instant, replaced by the unrelenting control of Elden's machinery. My heart pounded, chest tight, mind screaming. I had come so close. We had almost escaped, and yet the town had reclaimed her, and now I was alone, carried away, separated, powerless. Hours later, I awoke in an unfamiliar location, far from Elden, far from her. The world outside was chaotic and ordinary, a jarring contrast to the precise, controlled town I had just fled. I had no information about her, no way to know if she was safe, if she remembered me, if she still existed as the fragment of connection I had risked everything to preserve. And yet, in the quiet of the night, I felt the memory of her gaze, the brush of her hand, the fragments of recognition that had survived Elden's manipulation. The thread remained, though stretched to its breaking point. I swore, silently and fiercely, that I would find her again. No matter the distance, no matter the obstacles, no matter the cost, I would return. I would pierce the town's perfection, unravel its secrets, and reclaim the fragments of her memory and presence. Because she was not just a fleeting encounter, she was the reason I returned, the reason I risked everything, the reason I could not abandon hope. And one day, I would find her again. Chapter 10. The Separation. I woke to a world that felt unnervingly ordinary. The hum of distant traffic, the scattered conversations of strangers, the uneven rhythm of life, all of it was a harsh contrast to Elden, to her, to the moments that had consumed every heartbeat of mine. I was far from the town, far from the forest we had almost reached, far from her. My limbs ached from the mechanical grip that had dragged me away, and my chest burned with the memory of the desperate sprint we had made together. I had come so close to touching freedom. And yet, her eyes, I could not erase them. That last glance, wide with fear, recognition, and trust, was imprinted into my mind. I could see the flicker of hope and confusion, the fragments of awareness she had retained despite Elden's manipulations. That single image became my anchor, my obsession, and the quiet pulse that kept me moving. The days after were disorienting. I wandered streets that felt jarringly chaotic, cities that reminded me of Elden only in contrast, messy, unpredictable, imperfect. Every passerby, every random detail, every sound of life outside Elden reminded me that the world I had returned to was not the one I wanted. I wanted her. I needed her. I had no way of knowing if she had survived the separation, if the fragments of recognition we had shared still existed, or if Elden had erased them entirely. Sleep brought no peace. I dreamed of her running, always just ahead or just beyond reach. I saw her smile, panic, hope, each image fragmentary, incomplete, fading as quickly as it appeared. I woke each morning with my chest tight, my hands trembling, and a fierce determination in my veins. I would return to Elden, no matter the cost. I began preparing in secret. Every rumor of Elden's locations, every report of visitors, every small anomaly I could track became part of my study. I sketched mental maps of terrain, memorized routes, rehearsed timing. Every detail of the town's shifting streets, every predictable drone rotation, every sensor I had glimpsed before was cataloged and analyzed. And through it all, the memory of her remained. Not just her presence, but the fragments of awareness we had shared. Her glance when she realized I was there, the subtle tilt of her head in response to my silent signals, the faint tremor in her fingers as they touched the fountain edge. All of it persisted, a thread reaching across the distance that separated us. I thought of the forest we had almost reached, the open air, the freedom just beyond the gates. I imagined her beside me, running, breathing, aware. I rehearsed the paths we would take, the moments when we could slip past surveillance, the turns that might lead us out. I imagined us moving together, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat, until Elden was behind us and the world beyond was ours to explore. But for now, I remained here, removed from the town, from her, from the fragile connection that had begun to form. I had no information, no certainty, only memory and anticipation. The thread of recognition persisted, taut and fragile, stretched across miles and boundaries, linking me to her in ways that were almost tangible. I recalled her voice, soft and deliberate, carrying fragments of curiosity and trust. I remembered the way she had moved through the town, aware in pieces, hesitant yet alive. Those memories were the compass I relied on, the map I followed, the reason I could not surrender to despair. And so I waited, patient, calculating, obsessive. Every day I prepared, I studied, I imagined. The outside world, dull and chaotic, became a space for planning, a proving ground for strategy. Every detail of Elden, every shift in streets, every drone rotation became part of a rhythm I could anticipate. I did not know how long it would take. I did not know how many more cycles of the town's opening would pass before I could reach her. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would return. I would find her. I would restore the fragments of her awareness and claim the moments that were stolen from us. Even in this distance, even in the emptiness of this ordinary world, her presence persists. It is in memory, in anticipation, in every heartbeat. It is enough to keep me moving, to keep me breathing, to keep me alive. Elden waits, and she is there, somewhere within it, fragments of recognition intact, waiting for the thread that links us to be restored. And I will follow that thread, no matter where it leads, until we are together again.